Good evening and welcome to the hour dedicated to talking about all things strange, weird, and paranormal. You're listening to Strange Talk, broadcasting on 1660 AM in Northside and 91.7 FM HD2 WVXU in Cincinnati. We're also streaming at radioartifact.com around the entire planet Earth. The intro track for this episode is the Strange Talk intro by Star Silk, and I'm your host, Alyx. And we have a very special guest tonight. If you would like to introduce yourself, because I think you'll do it better than I will.
And thank you, Alyx. My name is Dacre Stoker. I am the great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker. I'm also an author myself, and I'm really excited to talk to you tonight.
Yeah, I'm very, very excited to talk to you. We got to meet at CryptidCon. I think that was about a year and some change ago now. And we had some great discussions there, and I'm excited to continue that.
Absolutely. I feel, me branching out from strictly horror conventions, literary conventions, film conventions, going to cryptid and paranormal, it's not that different when you really think about it. It's just a little more modern, that both of us searching for things that we can't quite put our hands on. We're looking for evidence. I'm looking for evidence, and I found a lot to share with you about Bram Stoker and his writing of Dracula. Let's find the monsters in the world. Let's look for them, the creatures and the monsters and the spirits, and what does it take to go find them and bring them to public.
Exactly, and that's why I'm actually really excited that you're our first guest back. We took a little hiatus, so this is what we're calling season 4 now, and I've decided that our theme for this season is monsters. So I figured you would be the perfect person for that, and I'm very stoked.
Yes.
Oh, Mark, if you also want to introduce yourself.
Yes. Hi, I'm Mark. I am in charge of a cryptid group. I've been on the show before, and I am your all's new co-host. Fun fact, me and Alyx actually met at Mr. Stoker's table at the CryptidCon.
Yes, that is true. So this is kind of a full circle moment here.
Yes.
Except one thing, you can't call me Mr. Stoker anymore. That was my dad. So I'm Dacre Stoker for this interview. Okay, guys?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I'm a little Southern. That's a force of habit. Yes, Alyx, would you like to tell us about Dracula? I said Alyx, I'm sorry. Dacre, would you like to tell us a little bit about Dracula for the one person out there that might not know?
That's right. For that one guy, would you please raise your hand if you haven't read the book? But no, in all seriousness, it's really quite interesting. I've been at this 12 years. Mm-hmm. I stopped teaching. I'm still doing some of my coaching. But, I have found so many people out there that know Dracula. But they don't all necessarily know Dracula through reading the original novel that Bram Stoker, my great-granduncle, wrote and had published in 1897. So the short version is this. He's the guy that didn't invent vampires, because Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu wrote Carmilla. Varney the Vampire is written by Malcolm Reimer. And John Polidori came first with The Vampire. But Bram came fourth, but he packaged Dracula a little bit better than the others. Because the others are still well known, but no vampire is as well known as Count Dracula. And what Bram did differently than the others is he made his Count very accessible. He made it very realistic. He used writing tactics that I have borrowed from him, which is inserting real things, and it is sort of taking real superstitions and folklore and making them seem viable and realistic, which at the time scared the heck out of the people in London. The reviews that I've read about this book was like, how could Bram Stoker have written this? He's a very upstanding theatrical manager. You know, we never could expect this from him. This is crazy. So he obviously did the job right. Yes. So the book, you know, rocked the world. And, you know, sadly, as I said, it came out in 1897. He died in 1912, but it got really popular after the book was turned into a stage play, adapted by Hamilton Dean, John Balderston, and his widow as well, Bram's widow, on stage, and then, you know, Lugosi, and then on screen with Lugosi in 31 and Christopher Lee and everybody else for the last 127 years. So that's helped book sales, and it's also helped The Creature. What I'm out here doing and willing to talk about with you guys tonight is The Creature, yes, but let's also talk about the man that created the monster, Bram Stoker, because he's got a really interesting and yet strange background as well.
Yeah, because I know, I think kind of what we've talked about before is we think part of possibly why he wrote about that was, you know, he was ill as a kid, you know, and I feel like some of that comes across when he's talking about Dracula in his novel.
Yeah, he did have a troubled childhood. You know, it is fairly mysterious as far as what actually ailed him. The records that I've looked into, and all the other biographers, there's been 5 or 6 of them. I'm lucky because I've got privy to knowledge from his great-grandsons. So the short version is he's one of 7 kids. His youngest brother was my great-grandfather. Obviously, he had children. Bram had a younger brother, Tom, who had 1 child, and that line of the family's gone. But none of the other family members have any living relatives. Bram does, because he had a son. That son had a daughter. And that daughter had 3 boys, and 2 of those boys are alive, and they've got children. So when I say I've got inside information, some of the stuff that Bram left, letters, journals, books, made their way to private collections. Some of it made way to museums because Bram's widow sold them because she was like moving houses to downside. She also needed money until the book sales, you know, skyrocketed. So what I tell you tonight is things that I've gleaned by putting pieces of this puzzle. Who is Bram Stoker? Who is this monster? Where did he come from? From lots of different places. And one of these is looking into the family. Who knows what about his mysterious illness? I've even talked to doctors who specialize in forensic Victorian medicine because so much weird stuff was happening. And one doctor and I chatted about, you know, the whole concept of bloodletting. Bram had a couple of brothers and also an uncle who was famous for bloodletting. One of the brothers actually helped Bram write the novel when it came to all the medical sides, the actual transfusions, the brain trephination surgery. But back to Bram's illness. This doctor and I now think that Bram had a very serious case of respiratory asthma and allergies, and that he probably was bloodlet by one of his uncles. The uncle wrote a treatise on bloodletting children, and what I got out of that was they didn't know how many leeches to put on a kid or how many cc's to take out. It was just take out enough blood until the kid passed out. Yeah. And then rehydrate them with red wine and oil. So I think Bram that was subjected to that, and I think that sort of horrified him, but it gave them the whole concept of the blood is the life.
Exactly.
And when he was in this ill kind of state, He was told all kinds of stories by his mother, superstition and folklore from Ireland, all about banshees and changelings and pukas and their own versions of vampires. So as a little kid, he was, really kind of almost abused, but not consciously.
Yeah, they thought they were doing the right thing.
Sickly little. I think they probably felt they were.
Yeah.
But, keep him entertained, but telling him all these horrible stories about premature burial and ghosts and ghouls and all that good stuff. So that's the start of it, Alyx, of where it all began. And of course, he then had other things in his life that he experienced and the research that he did, which helped him kind of fall into place with the novel Dracula.
Yeah.
Actually, I was actually going to say, because there's something that I found pretty interesting, that you were talking about blood transfusions and all that. I learned earlier that the actual blood types weren't discovered until like 1901, which was pretty fascinating because, as someone pointed out, Lucy was probably AB positive since she got blood from 4 different random people. And that's the universal blood acceptance type.
By chance, Mark, you're right. I mean, like, who knows? They could have killed her with the blood transfusions.
That's what I was going to say. It might not have even been Dracula. She might have just been anemic and died from 4 different blood transfusions.
But, let's talk about that for a minute, because it's really an interesting point here. And I want to make this point, and we can, just brainstorm on it. So, as I said, Bram had 3 brothers who were quite well-known doctors that did interesting things. The older brother, Thornley, helped him with all the medical parts.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. Even though Thornley was doing blood transfusions, many others were doing them for years beforehand. Mm-hmm. But this is kind of gross. They were even taking blood from dogs and putting it into people that were really badly off.
Yeah.
So, it's like, isn't that gross?
Well, no, I was going to say, I was actually really excited because I learned the other day that blood transfusions were originally made illegal in France and England because they were worried it was going to make human-animal hybrids. That's not a joke.
No, I believe it. But, when you think about the whole idea of, here's Lucy, and one of the statements by Van Helsing, we need some good men to step forward. She needs good men's blood. Like the men in the society were, really smart, and, they would eat their meal and have port and cigars and make all the decisions in the House of Commons and House of Lords. Heaven forbid, a lady's going to be that smart or that worldly. But Bram he made a statement about that later on. But here we go. We got 4 different people giving their brave men stepping forward and giving blood. And yet the next day, when Van Helsing would come and visit her, Dr. Seward, who is supposed to be a very learned man, is dumbfounded. Because as a scientist, he knows that they just put blood in her the night before. The next day, she's totally pale and in need of blood again, and yet he sees no blood lying around the bed or on the floor. Mm-hmm. So he is perplexed because what he's representing, which was fairly new at the time, was the scientific process of we need to be able to do experiments, we need to be able to repeat them, we create a theory, further repetition, and then it becomes scientific law. Yes. And so such a big part of this book is Van Helsing saying, or Bram saying, science is good, and science is rapidly answering many questions. Remember, Charles Darwin had just published Origin of the Species, and so that rocked the religious world on their behind, and lots of different experiments were going on, lots of different industrial things were happening, and yet here we are in this story where science can't answer what the heck a supernatural being is doing. So Bram's note here is, there are mysteries which men can only guess at, which age by age they may solve, only in part. One of my favorite quotes from the novel. And he's saying, guys, science won't answer everything, but we have to have faith in ourselves to be able to unravel these other mysteries like religion and supernatural and folklore. Those things we can figure out together if we keep ourselves together and have faith.
Yeah, I love that. I love that line. I did a whole class in college on it was on science, magic, and the occult, and sort of what the difference between those things are. And basically, what we kind of ended up boiling it down to by the end is science explains the everyday. The occult kind of explains the stuff that's not everyday, the stuff that's like impossible or uncommon. And then religion basically explains literally miracles, things that are not possible at all, but happen anyway.
I like that. That it's funny. When I was a lot younger, I took a course, religion, witchcraft, and magic. It was long before I was really into Dracula, but the same thing, Alyx. It's like, what roles do they play in answering questions to the general population? And when you think about it, religion, witchcraft, magic, the occult, science, it's trying to answer questions that we can't quite figure out. And people want to know. We're curious. We need some sort of answers. And normally religion is the, has been the most powerful, but that's changed a lot. And so now people have moved towards science. And then when science can't answer it, well, there's that, old weird lady down the road that we call the witch. We're going to go to her, because by golly, the other two don't fix it. So I want my child fixed with whatever this disease is, or I want this answer to this thing. So they'll move towards superstition and folklore.
And as it turns out, a lot of folk magic is really, it's rooted in science. They just didn't know it was science, a lot of...
Yes, exactly. Well, herbs, different plants, different things. All derivatives have made all the medicines that we're used to, but oh my God, we're not going to let anybody know that, because that's that crazy witch lady that's giving you these herbs.
Yes, exactly.
Well, it's fascinating. On subject, but interesting, I think. I'm on Ozempic right now, and I get really sick on Ozempic. It makes me throw up. But ginger actually completely nullifies that, and that is something that you would we all understand the science behind ginger now, but 100 years ago that would have just been like an old wives' tale thing, you know what I mean? And it's just fascinating.
Oh yeah, because my grandmother used to say, when your tummy's upset, saltines and ginger ale.
Exactly.
And it worked.
And it works.
That's why we have so much of that sort of old Appalachian folk wisdom here, where drink your ginger ale, things like that, and it works because there is a science to it, but there's also probably a little bit of superstition to it. I'm sure there's some things that are fully psychosomatic as well, but that's still science.
Yes.
I was there was actually a point you had brought up earlier that I found fairly fascinating, because how progressive Bram was in his writing, because honestly, when you look at the men being big men taking over, the Dracula thing, it's Mina that's responsible for the catalyst of the downfall of the Count. It's she's the one that is cataloging the story. She's the one that's making all this happen, and then you see the chink in the armor when she when they're like, okay, well now you need to go to bed and let the men handle things. It's
no, you're right. You ask how progressive. Let me just set the tone a little bit. The family itself was quite progressive, led by mother. See, Abraham Sr., Bram's father, remember, six siblings in the family, and the father is a secretary, a high-level secretary in what's called Dublin Castle, the seat of British government in Ireland. So he had a pretty good job, but he was away a lot. Mother had a nanny, Ellen Crone, that the lady that I actually used in my prequel. She really was the nanny because she needed the help. But Mrs. Stoker was very advanced. You could call her a social activist. She delivered papers to the Social Statistical Society of Dublin, which was an all-male society, but she forced her way in to deliver these papers. And one of them was about the education of the deaf and the mute. And another one was about the poor conditions for women in workhouses. There's others, but those are the two germane to this conversation. So I believe that Bram, when he was writing Dracula, was sort of channeling his mother through Mina. as the modern woman, who, as you said, Mark, absolutely, not only could she have the confidence of Van Helsing to take the notes from Dr. Seward off of the recording phonograph and type them on a typewriter, which was unheard of, really, for most women. That was like a men's deal, but she did that. But it was a result of her being able to correlate all those notes and hand them in 5 copies to Van Helsing to give to the men to say, okay, guys, now you can see what you're all talking about. Because up until that point, even though individually they had their suspicions, and you read that in the book through journals and newspapers and that kind of stuff, none of them could come together efficiently and say, well, let's put all the evidence together and figure this out. It was Mina that helped them do that. But you're right, when she was stricken because she had the blood exchange with Dracula and she'd have to sleep or she'd go into a trance, things would fall apart. So she is the glue that keeps them together. And I think it is absolutely right, Mark. It's because he is making a statement. His progressive self was making a statement about not just science and faith, but also about women. It's about damn time we let them, sort of take over and take their fair place in society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to say, I've heard a number of people argue that she's the real protagonist of the novel.
I think that for sure.
Speaking of progress, sort of how do you feel about kind of the evolution of vampires in media? Obviously, it's changed a lot since this novel.
Wow. Yeah. I get questions like that a lot. And it's like, first of all, I say, you got to think that Bram is sitting somewhere in the spirit world just going, yes,
exactly.
look what I've done, what can I do now, So he creates this thing. Mm-hmm. He also makes darn sure that he does protect the dramatic rights by having a staged reading at the Lyceum Theater.
Yes.
So he has a license, and incidentally, he did that to his other novels as well. And I've actually seen the certificates, which is really cool, you guys, because, I got my hands in a lot of things, and I've become pretty well recognized as one of the experts in the world in Bram and Dracula. Mm-hmm. And I get this email from the Royal Literary Society and another one from the British Archives. They both have found things in their archives that they thought I'd be interested in. And that is because in this day and age, post-COVID, a lot of people are now back at it. Mm-hmm. And they're hiring museums and libraries and universities are hiring people to come in and continue the digitization of their stored documents.
Oh, yeah.
It's a long, slow process.
Mm-hmm.
And as they get digitized, they realize what the heck they have. And trust me, like that scene in Indiana Jones with the massive crates in the super warehouse. Yeah. I have seen stuff like that in these libraries. There's so many things undigitized. I'll never live long enough. And so I said to the guys at Trinity College, I said, I know there's a lot of papers in here that my family had donated. How do we get them to the front of the pile? Mr. Stoker, if you donate $40,000, we'll hire an intern. We'll do it for you. It'll be done by the next week. But it's like, okay, if I make a killing on a movie deal or win the lottery, I'll be sending you $40,000 and get it out there, because it's just like, it would be nice to get that stuff out there to the world. Yeah. So that's one of the things that you look at. But I'll get back to your question, Alex, and that is, Dracula has proliferated around the world because of a couple of things. One, Bram put him on stage, mm-hmm. and he kept the rights. His wife made some money. She also was involved in selling those dramatic rights, went on film. Once it does that, of course, there's an avenue to go crazy. But I'll also tell you this interesting little factoid. I want to see what you guys think about this. It's a fact that I've come up, more like a theory, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Dracula does not get fully fleshed out as a character in Bram's novel. You don't really know much about where he came from, other than one sentence when Van Helsing says he must have come from the Sholomonts, where the devil takes the final student as his tuition, the School of the Dark Arts. That's it. right? And then we only really get to know Count Dracula through the main characters. All their worries, all their concerns. We don't really have somebody sitting down with Count Dracula. Like when Jonathan Harker is in there in chapter 1 and 2 and 3, you hear a little bit about his background, which is the background of Vlad the Impaler, right? The fights, the battles he's had. So we know that, but we don't really know what his motivation is.
Yeah.
What is he coming to England for? Just to bite some more people and expand his network? Or as other authors have done, Kim Newman and others, let's take over British Parliament. Let's take over the world. Let's go here and do this. So I think the reason he's been able to be fleshed out so well and developed is that Bram kept him in the shadows, and he's left lots of room for authors and screenwriters, playwrights, to flesh him out in their own way to keep him relatively new and fresh. Otherwise, if Bram created him to the nth degree, people would have to go to great lengths to come up with something new and different. Yeah. As it is, they got lots of room to play with. So what are your thoughts on that theory of mine about the sort of not very well-defined Dracula, which plays into the hand of why he's so prolifically described in so many different works to this day?
I think I fully agree with you there. Obviously, a lot of the most terrifying works of horror tend to leave things up to the imagination, because if you leave it kind of vague like that, whatever that person comes up with in their head is going to be more terrifying than anything you can put on paper, because they know what their own worst fears are. So they can kind of ascribe that to that blank piece there.
Yeah, I mean, like literarily speaking, it's a absolutely genius way to, incorporate the fear of the unknown into your story as far as like Dracula goes, because it's this entity. It's more than a man. It's this essentially for all intents and purposes like a malevolent god among men.
I was thinking an archetype kind of in some ways.
Yeah, and it's like Lovecraft's whole theory on weird fiction is like the horror comes from we're just these small, all humans in these stories are just these small tiny beings in this vast global world of these colossal entities, and I think Dracula fits amongst them very well. And yes, I 100% agree with your theory. I think it is part of the longevity of the character.
Well, there we go. I got two more converts. I think it is. It's not a big leap, because all I'm really doing is looking at what Bram left us. I don't really know what Bram was thinking about, because nobody really does. I found his notes. They live in the Rosenbach Museum, and that's places and sequences and research, but it doesn't really say this is my devil incarnate. It comes from Henry Irving playing Mephistopheles, but I blended in Vlad the Impaler because his name is Dracula, and I put them together. I think many of us know that's it. Yeah. But he hasn't stated it. We have to kind of use circumstantial evidence. I mean, one of the cool pieces of circumstantial evidence I think you guys saw at Cryptid was the one page that Bram listed all of his characters, and his original name for Count Dracula was Count Vampire, which is Austrian. And although that page isn't dated, we know that's very early in his writing process, around 1890, because we know of other characters that he'd written down. And then he goes to Whitby on the Yorkshire coast of England for his holiday. And we know he goes into the library there because there's the names of the books that he checked out, his name signed there, and one of those books he transcribed into his notebook. Dracula, in the Valachian language, means devil. It was used to give to someone's name who displayed courage, cruel action, or cunning. And in the novel, Van Helsing described Count Dracula that way. Courage, cruel action, cunning, twice. So that's obviously what he was doing. He needed a guy with a really good backstory. He didn't need a vampire, but he needed somebody who was worthy of becoming a vampire. And that's where all the cool backstory and back history came from.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I know you obviously write your own books. I know one of them is you wrote a prequel to Dracula that I haven't gotten to read yet that I'm very excited about. How much more do you dig into in that?
Well, without spoiling it for you, Alex, or anybody else on this show, you've got to get the book, because I really feel that, it's my latest novel. I've written a couple nonfiction since then, but having a writer like J.D. Barker along, who's written 2 New York Times bestsellers with James Patterson, or for James Patterson, I have to say, but James does his work.
Yeah.
But he's wonderful to work with. But what we go through in that story, and here's the sort of the synopsis, is I felt that Bram's life needed to be fictionalized, so it wasn't just included in a boring work of nonfiction.
Yeah.
But fictionalizing it, as I had a pretty darn good idea, like I talked at the top of the show about Bram's illness. But imagine for a moment this, guys, and it's kind of cool as I say this, because we're just a few days from the Paris Olympics opening. And I was a coach of the Olympic team for Canada in modern pentathlon in '88. So I get very nostalgic every time an Olympic Games comes on. But I also have strange memories of 12 years of doing Olympic sport myself, getting boycotted out of 1980, making the team as a coach in '88, but seeing in those days lots of illegal drugs being used, performance-enhancing drugs.
Yeah.
And so when I was doing my digging into Bram's life, I could not help but think, even though I had this forensic doctor specializing in Victorian illnesses and medicine, to think, as many authors do, and Mark, you write, and Alex, I'm not sure if you write yourself, but you read, I know, the great question of what if always comes up. You think, oh, cool situation. What if I use that in a story? Or what if that really happened? Well, I thought of Bram's recovery from his mysterious 7-year illness, which he made such an abrupt recovery that at the age of 7, he was up and walking around again after saying, I didn't know what it was like to stand upright for 7 years. Within 10 years of getting out of bed, he is now a champion, race walker, rugby player, rower, all-around athletics champion at Trinity College. How do you go from invalid to champion? And so I thought, well, in my world, I know about guys taking steroids and blood doping and all the rest. But in my other world, what about a little supernatural boost? What about something like that? So that's where the whole premise, Alex, came from to write this story. And that was, number one, based on the original preface that I found of Dracula, that really pointed towards the novel being real before his publisher had him tone it down a bit. And what if he had a very good reason to believe, because of maybe blood transfusions or supernatural blood, that cured him? What happens if he knew vampires were real? And as his life progressed as a child, and then up until he was working for Henry Irving in London as a theater manager, and he developed enough research, and he met the right people, like those people who were vacationing in Whitby and experienced Dracula himself, that he now feels he must warn the world that vampires, in particular Count Dracula, is real. And rather than risk being thrown into an asylum himself, write a book about it. Because nobody probably would have believed him, but if he writes a book about it, he's got a chance. So it's like a veiled fictional story. That's why Dracula feels so realistic, and that's why Dracul, that J.D. and I wrote, was also written in the epistolary style and feels bloody realistic.
Nice. I was actually going to say, you brought up your past as an Olympic coach. I was, having met you before, reading your Wikipedia page, learning that you were an Olympic coach in Seoul, South Korea, really caught me off guard. I was like, oh, that didn't come up at all. Alyx, is this your first Olympian on the show?
That I know of. There
You
could
never know
be
where we
somebody
lurk.
Exactly. If somebody else has been, they didn't mention it to me, and so they're keeping that as a close kept secret. But I do love the parallels there. Obviously, that you as well as Bram Stoker himself kind of both had this athletic history.
It's this athletic side, and I think in a funny way, there's a number of things. First of all, Bram had a master's in math. That's the farthest thing that my brain can handle, so I don't have that. But that detail-oriented side that he had as a clerk in the Petty Sessions Legal Department, that wrote a manual for all the clerks in the Petty Sessions Legal Department in Ireland, that then goes and runs a theater, manages things from behind the scenes. I'm very much like that. Yes. And also his athletic outlet. I get it. For some of us, you just need to get out there and challenge yourself, push yourself, not necessarily to prove yourself, but because if you did, then Bram would have been somebody who wanted to maybe elevate above Henry Irving and come out of the limelight. No, I think Bram was very confident in his own skin, knew what he could do. And like I am, I love sport. I also really get great satisfaction out of coaching people to do well. I've now coached a young lady who became a world champion in modern pentathlon, and a young man, not so young anymore, 35, Camden Revere, world champion of court tennis. So 2 different sports, and that seems to be my thing. And when I write, particularly with co-authors, it's very similar. It's coaching each other. What part are you going to do? What research am I going to do? Are you going to allow me to write some text? I'll send the stuff to you because you're better at finishing everything and putting it together. I'll do my bit. And it is sort of like a teamwork. And I'm confident in that. And I'm not worried that I've got to share the spotlight like Bram did with Henry Irving, even though we're experts in our field.
And that makes sense too, because I know you were a teacher as well. And I think that's part of why you're kind of the perfect person to talk about this, not just because it is your family, but because you're good at talking about it.
Thank you. Thanks.
Well, thank you for talking with us about it, because this is honestly, I know we've gotten to talk about some of this stuff before, but it is just such fascinating stuff. Vampires are just such cool creatures out of all of the different
one thing things. I want to get in. I want to get in this before we get stuck, and I'm not sure what else you guys have, but I think since I've met you both, I've discovered some new and interesting things that kind of borders on the paranormal. Yeah. You guys want to go there?
Yeah, let's go there.
Okay. Yes.
All right. Because my research never ends. And every now and then, because of digitization, things pop up. Both my wife and I have Google alerts about Bram Stoker, Dracula, and all these other keywords. And I also have friends in places that know I'm into this. And a buddy of mine in Cruden Bay, Scotland, Mike Shepherd, who I've written a book all about the history of Slains Castle with. Now, Slains Castle is the castle that Bram Stoker visited when he was writing Dracula in Cruden Bay, Scotland. It was owned by the Hay family, and they were descendants of the Earl of Errol and all of his family for 500 years. So when Bram went to stay in Cruden Bay in 1893 through 1911, he visited the Earl on a few occasions. And let me tell you something really strange, and then we'll get to the supernatural and the occult and the paranormal part. Nice. The interior of Slains Castle has exactly the same layout as the interior of Bram Stoker's fictional castle Dracula.
Interesting.
Nice.
The exterior of Castle Dracula, the fictional one, was portrayed in 2 books in the London Library that Bram Stoker listed in his notes as his research books. They was the only castle in any of the research books that was portrayed in a sketch, and it was Bran Castle in Romania. So Bram, much like he merged Henry Irving playing Mephistopheles and Vlad the Impaler to make Count Dracula, he merged Slains Castle in Cruden Bay, Scotland, and Castle to be his fictional castle, and he moved it up onto an old volcano, which we'll get to because it has to do with the original ending of the novel. But this story that I came across, that Mike turned me on to from a newspaper article that was recently digitized from Dundee, Scotland, not very far from Cruden Bay, sort of near Aberdeen, that when Bram was there for a summer holiday, he was invited to a party. Henry Irving was in either Glasgow or Edinburgh, and they were there visiting, and they were both invited to this gathering. And this guy called Norval Scrimmanger, this writer of a newspaper, was also a guy who believed in sort of the paranormal, the occult, and something called second sight. So back then they called this for premonitions as second sight. And Bram, I have now learned, because of what I'm about to tell you, was not just interested in it, but I believe he was a believer. So here are the things that were in that article. There was 2 separate incidences that Mr. Scrimmanger writes about. He says, first of all, going to this dinner, I thought the most interesting thing to do would be to meet Henry Irving. But I was far more interested in sitting by the fire and listening to Bram Stoker regale the small audience with these 2 stories that he experienced personally of second sight. And they both occurred very close to Dundee. And he went on to say he visited a family, and I don't know exactly where, what little town, that the mother, he walked in, the mother was holding the young baby at a year or so old in her arms, and they had a 5-year-old child. And father was out getting the whiskey or something, stoking the fire, whatever. And the little girl came in crying and said, and I forget the name of the little baby, she's gonna die. She won't be able to play again. And the mother said, don't be worried, don't be crazy, she's fine. She's not ill at all. And then the little girl kept persisting. And the mother said, look, she's been healthy, there's nothing wrong with her whatsoever. And so Bram said, isn't that strange? Has she ever said anything like this again? And the mother said, yes, sometimes. Bram had a nice evening. He went back, and 2 days later, he found out that unexpectedly the baby just died.
Wow.
So this daughter foresaw this, just like that. Yeah. So one of those could be freakish, right?
Yeah.
Okay. This next one, Bram was invited by the Earl of Errol from Slains Castle to go on a pheasant shoot. And so all of the sort of important people of the town, they get this invite every now and then. And they show up in all their fancy tweeds and everything else. And the Earl of Errol has loaders or gillies to provide to his guests. So if it was Bram, he'd have a gilly. Mr. Brown would be the gilly. He'd hold the shotgun. They'd walk on through the field. And when the dogs pointed, the birds rose, Mr. Brown would hand the shotgun to Bram, fully loaded. Bram would go boom, boom. He'd hand it back to Brown. Brown would load it up again, boom, boom. So you develop this close relationship over the course of the day with your gilly.
Yeah.
So Bram said to his gilly, he said, well, how's the Earl doing? And he said, oh, not all that well. The sheet is high. Now, the sheet is high, and when he says not all that well, any of you two have any idea what he's alluding to?
I do not, yeah.
I don't
Here's
either.
Here's a hint. If you're dead, what do they do with a sheet? Okay, hold that thought. That thought.
Okay.
So the shoot is over, and they all go back, and they have a feast, eat some of the pheasants, and then, Bram goes back to the Kilmarnock Arms Hotel. He has his holiday, and he's always wondering, I wonder what is the matter with the Earl. He goes back to England. He's only up there for 3 weeks or so. Goes back to London, does his thing, and the very next summer, he and Florence and young Noel Stoker come back to visit, like they always do, and they get yet another invite. to go out on yet another shoot. And Bram is wondering, I need to check in with this Gilly who gave me wrong information last time.
Mm-hmm.
So he requests, and I don't know, Gilly Brown. And so they start off on the day, and he goes, well, Mr. Brown, it appears you were incorrect of the arrow. He seems totally fine. Oh, no, the sheet is much higher, sir, much higher. And Bram goes, don't be silly. He looks healthy, he's robust. He goes, no, there is signs. So they have a nice shoot, have a nice feast. Bram goes back to Monarch Arms. 2 days later, the Earl dies of an unexpected brain aneurysm.
Mm-hmm.
Damn.
So the sheet was obviously very high.
Yeah. Wow.
So
Yeah.
that is, those are two. Now it gets better. One book that a friend of mine, Professor John Browning, found that Bram Stoker reviewed, the one book and only one book that he reviewed, and that book I found once John told me this was in Bram's private collection, his own library. And it was a book he reviewed. It was about second sight in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. And he reviewed it for a newspaper in New Zealand, if you can believe it. And he gave it a very positive review. Not just positive that was well written, that these things are quite possible and believable. Don't discount this as mere fuddy-duddy. You know, he gave it great credibility. So all those little pieces of circumstantial evidence, you guys, really makes me believe that Bram was interested and was a believer. And then I found one more thing. When I went on to read the book, The Mystery of the Sea, which is one of my favorite novels now that Bram wrote, other than Dracula, the first 2 chapters were published earlier as a short story called The Seer. And it was about this lady Gormala, a lady from the Highlands of Scotland who came to Cruden Bay and possessed second sight.
That's so
So
cool.
he did what he does. He takes things he believes in or other people do believe in and want them to believe in and fictionalize it in a way that makes it really quite real.
Yeah. That is so cool.
Yeah. That's
So
very
they
cool.
walk amongst us, you guys. Believers do.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, like, gosh, just how creepy that happened. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. Probably more than that.
Yeah.
You know, that's just what you've been able to find.
Yeah.
But
That's right. Yeah.
That is absolutely fascinating.
So one of the things I did, and I'll give you a little preview, I've written a book that's not published yet. It's being looked at by Penguin Random House in England.
Mm-hmm.
So a good friend of mine, Leverett Butts from University of North Georgia, is an author, and I brought him all those stories I've just told you guys, as well as the fact that I've been to Cruden Bay 3 times, done an incredible amount of research on everything Bram did there. And we have written the story about the summer of 1893 where Bram is in this town and has good reason to experience many of the things that he inserts into the novel Dracula, because he's writing the novel that summer. And as he's writing it, he experiences some second sight. He experiences getting trapped in the castle himself, not on purpose, by mistake, and weird stuff happening. So fingers crossed, hopefully this novel will get picked up by Penguin Random House. If not, I'm sure somebody will. So that's it might be in the works. They might request more editing, but that's the next work. Hopefully, it sort of continues with what I've been doing, writing with different co-authors and putting the whole puzzle together, Bram Stoker's life and where Dracula fit in that life.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, and I know in your notes here too, your last release was the annotated for the 125th anniversary version of Dracula, where you added all your own notes and insights in there, which I think is just such a great way to do that. That way you can kind of pinpoint things together while you read. I love
Yeah, and I just want to give a plug to that, because the fellow that I wrote it with, Robert 18 Basang, this, you can't make this stuff up. He died just 4 months after we finished 2 years of working on this Dracula annotated for the 125th. And he had a minor heart problem. He went into the hospital in Vancouver, British Columbia, and he was on all these blood thinners waiting to have a stint put in. And he got out of bed. He shouldn't have. He was impatient. He got out of bed to go to the loo, and he tripped on all the wires and banged his head. And as a result of all the blood thinners, he, as his widow said, he died of a Renfield incident. A bleed out in the brain. Isn't that freaking bizarre?
That is very bizarre. Perfect terminology and a horrible way for that to happen.
Yes.
It is, and we both sort of said, if Robert could have scripted it, that's the way he wanted it, But one thing we did, and I just, again, a little shameless plug here, we found, because we're 2 of 6 people that actually had access to the Dracula typescript. Now, this is Bram's typed up typescript. For some reason, he gave it to Walt Whitman's lawyer. Bram and Walt Whitman were pen pals and sort of friends that way. Walt Whitman left in his will all of his notes for his lectures on Abraham Lincoln. Bram was a great fan of Whitman's writing, but also Abraham Lincoln for freeing the slaves and helping America be powerful and free. Whitman left those notes for Bram, and so Bram, on a trip over to America for the Lyceum Theater, brought the typescript, gave it to Thomas Donaldson. This has a really weird provenance to it. It was found only about 15 years ago, so it was lost for 50 years in a farm in Pennsylvania that the Donaldson family had owned for generations. It was in a trunk in the barn. And when the last Donaldson left and they went to clear out all this old crap, they found wrapped in oil paper this old manuscript. It was the original manuscript with lots of handwritten notes and crossed out things for Dracula. It sold at auction to Paul Allen for just under $1 million. Wow. That's what Robert and I were able to analyze, but we weren't allowed to take photographs. But we were able to write things on paper in our notepads. And everything that was taken out of the typescript, that means chapters 1, 2, and 3, and the deleted ending and lots of other nuggets in between, Robert and I put back in to the Dracula annotated for the 125th. So we've reinserted the things cut out. We've re-established what chapters 1 and 2. Actually, chapter 1 was a series of letters. Chapter 2 was simply the short stories Dracula's Guest that Bram's wife published years later. And chapter 3, spoiler alert, we don't write the chapter out, but we show all the notes on A Night at the Opera and the Munich Dead House. So we sort of put those together. So if you're listening and want to know what Dracula looked like, go to Amazon. It's $20 paperback. Dracula annotated for the 125th anniversary. You get a kick.
I actually just grabbed it. I just grabbed it while we were talking about this because I was like, I do want a copy of that.
We before the show, we were warming up. You actually brought up something I thought you wanted to talk about, which is Walt Whitman and Bram Stoker's philosophical ideologies.
Yeah, we were talking about it. So let's further that conversation. I think your listeners would like that.
Yeah.
And thank goodness you remembered what I was having a hard time with, and that was the whole concept of this sort of holistic religion called pantheism.
Yes.
Where not one religion gets to rule the world, but all are recognized as being okay. But the overriding concept is Mother Earth, essentially. That everything is incorporated together, and that I really believe Bram sort of had a conversion. That I think he was, it's not that he was against religion. He was a practicing Protestant. He married in a church, went to services. But I think when he went to Cruden Bay, and as I said, guys, I've been there twice now, I felt this. It is part of the country of Scotland that the ocean is, you're right on the edge of the ocean. You're very close to Norway, actually, when you're in Cruden Bay, where that part of Scotland juts out. And it rolls very flatly into the sand dunes, to a lovely golf course, and to all kinds of fields. You don't see mountains around, but at low tide, and there's a massive tidal swing, you see these really incredible rock formations that seem to jut out of the water. It's about a 15-foot change in tide. And this is where granite and this black rock called gneiss, K-N-I-C-E, had come together in a massive upheaval. And Bram had a geological survey map when he discovered the town. And that was one of the features that I think interested him, because it shows this upheaval of the under earth, where he gets the idea of hell, of, supernatural forces at work. And he brings this out not only in Dracula in the volcanic eruption, but also in the mystery of the sea, with bad stuff going on underground, under the earth's surface. So I think this is where Bram was into the whole bit, the sun, the moon, the earth, the stars, as were the sailors and all of the villagers that he would have met and conversed with for 11 summers while he was in Cruden Bay. So that is, I think, Mark, how Bram bonded with his friend even after Walt Whitman died, that this was Bram's place to sort of feel his presence. And as my good buddy Mike Shepard said, there's lots of passages in Dracula that if you know Walt Whitman, you'll pick up the essence of Whitman in the novel.
Yes.
I do have a kind of goofy but related question that one of our listeners wanted us to ask you. And that was, is there some sort of like horror novelist secret society or bowling league that like you and Joe Hill, Stephen King's son, are in?
That's too good. I mean, we're all members of the Horror Writers Association, and we hang out, once a year wherever the convention is.
Yeah.
I certainly respect both of their writings, and actually Stephen King was the guy that I read in college, along, and got into, sort of the horror stories. Salem's Lot was the one that really got me going.
I love Salem's Lot.
Got off. Recent years when he came out and said if Bram Stoker was going to bring Count Dracula to the shores of England, the United States, it would be in Maine, in Salem's Lot. It's like, even the king himself is bowing down to, Bram Stoker, which is pretty cool. So I love that. Absolutely.
Apparently you all need to go bowling at some point.
Yeah.
At some point, that we'll need to do that. That would be sort of cool. If there'll have to be some adult beverage, and there'll have to be, maybe some bloodshed or something. Otherwise, it wouldn't be.
Bloody bowling.
Yeah, there you go. We'll have to put somebody down at the end holding the pins as we go.
I love that. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you. We're getting close to the top of the hour here, so thank you so much for talking with us. I know there's so much more like I would even love to talk about. There's just so much good stuff there, honestly. But I've got some books coming that I'm going to read. So
you've got books, and let me just give this, like, you want to find out more. Number one, here's some free information. bramstoker.org. You can read all of Bram Stoker's works for free, obviously online on your computer. BramStokerEstate.com. My wife and I run that. Lots of cool information about the family, about Bram, his books. You can also buy my books from there. And the Stokerverse is a new venture that I'm working on with Chris McCauley. We now have an RPG game out. We've got a board game out. We've got a card game coming out. We have an actual handheld computer game coming out. We're delving into film, so the Stokerverse.com. And then DacreStoker.com talks about my lectures I give around the world, and also the tours that I lead with Experience-Transylvania to Romania, Transylvania, Scotland, Cruden Bay, Whitby. So if you ever want to do something crazy like that, go to any of those websites and you can find me or DacreStoker.com and ask me about those things. Love to have any of you guys join me on some of my ghoulish tours to Romania. This Halloween, we're actually renting Bran Castle on
That's
October
cool.
28th, where
Nice.
we're actually taking over the whole place to have our own party there.
That is
That's-
so amazing.
That's sick. That's awesome.
That's amazing. Is there anything else?
Thank you guys for having. No,
Yeah,
just
of
really
course.
thank you for being open-minded and
course.
meeting me at Cryptid. And so thank you for creating this platform so people can learn more about Strange Talk. I love doing it with you guys.
Yeah, we
Awesome.
love talking to you about it too. And thank you for sharing your fun, spooky stuff that we haven't even gotten to talk about yet. I'm glad that you remembered that. But yeah, so I think on that note, we're going to go ahead and sign off for the night. Thanks for listening to Strange Talk. I'm Alyx.
And I'm Mark.
Good night.
And good luck.
You are listening to Strange Talk on Radio Artifact on 1660 AM in Northside and 91.7 FM HD to WVXQ in Cincinnati.